Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Palestine Briefing and four key aspects on the occupation of Palestine. This briefing is predominantly for everyone who's part of the Palestine student review taking place on February the 3rd. Obviously, everybody's welcome and everyone's welcome to engage with the expert panel members and discuss the key issues. The idea, the format is 10 to 15 minutes briefing from each of our panelists on their designated subject, and then we'll have a discussion with any questions as well. We'll put these videos online, we'll put them up and send them around so people can learn. These videos will be a go-to point for referencing when you've got 10 minutes and you want to learn about something. This will be the place, because we have an expert panel today. We will start straight away, go all the way to Palestine and go to Brother Issa from Youth Against Settlement. You'll be talking to us about settlements, I believe. Issa is also the founder of Youth Against Settlements, and I believe you joined us a couple years ago when we did Palestine Expo as well. So again, thank you for joining us. And straight over to you to discuss about settlements. Brother Issa.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much for organizing this. I think Friends of Al-Aqsa is doing a great job, and they do a lot of support to the Palestinian cause. I want to talk about the Israeli settlement. What is the Israeli settlement and what we mean by the Israeli settlement? Let me say Palestinians suffered from the Nakba in 1948, and then they suffered from the Nakba in 1967, the occupation of West Bank and Gaza Strip. Immediately after Israel occupied the West Bank on 1967, they started working to create facts in the ground to steal the Palestinian land and build a new settlements in the Palestinian occupied territories. The first settlement which was built in West Bank was Kiryat Arba settlement in Hebron. Kiryat Arba settlement is now 7,200 settlers. The Israeli settlements are really getting a lot of political support and financial support and even social support from the Israeli government and from many other, let me say, political power in the world. Why we are against the Israeli settlement? We are against the Israeli settlement because it's against the international law, especially Geneva Convention, Article 49. It considers all the settlements in the occupied Arab territories and Julan Heights, not only West Bank and Gaza Strip, even Julan Heights and Jerusalem for sure, are illegal, and it's even a war crime. This is a reference to my work and our work in Palestine against the Israeli settlement. Israel tried to go over the international law and sort settlements by settlements, which is legal according to the Israeli law, and it's a kind of contradiction between the Israeli domestic law and the international law, because the international law considers all the settlement as illegal, but in Israel they consider the settlement which was built by the Israeli government or approved by the Israeli government as legal settlements. We have around 132 settlements all over West Bank and inside Jerusalem and inside Hebron, with a total of 650,000 Israeli settlers who are considered as illegal. On the other hand, they use the term for something called outpost. Outpost, it's Israeli settlement built in Palestinian land, but without the approval of the Israeli government, but it was built by an initiative of the Israeli settlers. And we have around 132 different outposts in West Bank, but the Israeli government doesn't enforce law on the Israeli outpost. In the contrary, they work very hard to demolish the Palestinian houses close to these outposts, and they give them electricity, they give them water, they give them communication, and give them escort, and build to them roads. And from time to time, we have something called whitening the Israeli outpost, which means that they make them legal by approving them. And in the last years, they approved many Israeli outposts to become settlements. But for us, all the settlements in the occupied Arab territories are illegal, and it's a war crime. The Israeli settlers who are living in the Israeli settlements vary from one to another. You can find Israeli settlers who are living in a settlement for economical reason. So Israeli politics are pushing the Israelis to live in the settlement because of economical reasons. For example, to buy a house or not a house, apartment in Tel Aviv, it costs may at least, you can say, 20 times more to buy an apartment in a settlement in West Bank. Even you can buy a very nice house with a lot of discount, and you can pay very little per year or per month. So they encourage the Israeli settlers to go and live in West Bank for economical reasons. You have other kind of settlers are there for religious or political reasons, as in Hebron. We have the settlers who are the follower of Meir Kahane, Kach movement, which was considered in the United States and Israel and in many other countries as illegal and as a terrorist organization. Meir Kahane was the leader of this Kach movement, was not allowed to visit London. We hope that we work together to make the Israeli settlers and the violent one not able to come to London or to UK or to Europe or to the United States. How the settlers take the land? They take the land by when Israel was established 1948. More than 90% of the land was for the Palestinians. Now we are losing land year by year, and the main tactics the Israeli occupation use is by declaring the Palestinian land as a state land, and then they pass it to the Israeli settlers, or military zones for military training, as Kiryat Arba. And the classical way of land confiscation, you can say that settlements first, then military bases first, then settlements after. Kiryat Arba, the first settlement in West Bank, which was built, was a military base. Nowadays in Hebron, the Israeli army is passing the Palestinian, bus station to the Israeli settlers. They occupied it, they used it as a military base, and now they are passing it to the Israeli settlers to build a new settlement inside our city, or by declaring the land as, they call it a training zone for the army, or as agriculture zone, or they use any term to occupy or confiscate the Palestinian land. They use different laws, even the Ottoman laws, the Jordanian laws, the military law. What legal system is implemented in the Israeli settlement? We as Palestinians, we are living under the Israeli military law, which means we don't have any basic human rights. And I'm convicted in the military court on 6 military charges because of my non-violence activities. I would not be convicted if I'm an activist in UK or in any other country. On the other hand, the Israeli settlers are under the Israeli civilian law. So we have 2 sets of law like this, one for the Israeli settlers and one against the Palestinians. So we have 2 sets of law in the same area. That is apartheid. And this is what B'Tselem described in their latest report about apartheid. From the river to the sea, the Israeli policies are apartheid, and this is one of the main reasons that we Palestinians who are living in our own houses, We are not equal with the Israeli illegal settlers who are living in our land illegally according to the international law. But unfortunately, the international community is not till now using the term apartheid. We hope that we all work together to make this phrase describe the real life under the Israeli occupation. I was arrested many times, and many other Palestinians were arrested many times after being attacked by the Israeli settlers. One of the charges which I was convicted in the military court on January 6th was that an Israeli settler attacked me when I was filming an Israeli settlers riot, and he claimed that I attacked him. So his testimony is stronger than mine because I am under the as a Palestinian, I'm under the military law, which means that I'm guilty till I'm proven innocent. And the Israeli settlers is right in the military system. So that is the military system, and this is the legal, situation in the West Bank. I can say that we have two main settlements group. You can say that who are very violent, and we should all work together to expose them. One is something called Hilltop Youth. The Hilltop Youth are, Israeli settlers. They are between 14 years old and 17 years old. Hilltop Youth, they go and occupy the hilltops, the mountains, the Palestinian land. They organize themselves to attack Palestinian land, to attack Palestinian people, to attack Palestinian farmers. This month, you can say, counted more than 30 attacks from the Israeli Hilltop Youth and all over West Bank. They are supported by the army. They are supported by the Israeli government. They have a political backup from even the prime minister, the Israeli prime minister, and from many other Israeli parliamentarians. And they live with impunity. Impunity, means that they are not accountable for their violent attitude against the Palestinians. Another main group who the Palestinians are suffering a lot, it's called price tag campaigns. What is price tag campaigns? Price tag campaigns, it's a settlement group, settlers. They organize themselves to make the Palestinian pay the price for any political disagreement between the Israeli settlements movement and the Israeli government or the Israeli political leadership. So when they fight among each other, the Palestinians pay the price. And they are the ones behind killing Muhammad Abu Khair in Shafat, a Palestinian child. His name Muhammad Abu Khair. He was kidnapped, tortured, and burned alive, and he was killed. It was a group of settlers from the price tag campaign. The Wabshi family in Nablus too. Settlers, they burned a Palestinian family alive, and their family was killed. Only one was saved. The father, the mother, and another kid were killed. And unfortunately, the settlers, till now, they are not accountable for this kind of attacks. In Hebron, I watched their attacks. I saw them organized with vests, with special uniform, with special bags, and they have a lot of money. They have a lot of political support. They get money. They get donation, and many settlers are very proud of them. In Israel, they have a lot of discussion about them. They wanted to consider them a terrorist organization, but unfortunately, Mr. Bibi Netanyahu refused for political reasons. I hope that we work together to make UK consider price tag campaigners as a terrorist organization for their violent attitude against the Palestinians. The Palestinians, are living now in West Bank without any rights, and the Israeli settlers, they are controlling, you can say, at least 50% of West Bank, and they are trying to control around 70% of West Bank, and they wanted in the last year to do something called annexation. Annexation means to annex West Bank to Israel, the settlements, without the Palestinians, for sure. So they are working very hard now in area, what it's called Area C, because according to the peace agreement, it's called Oslo Accord, they sorted the Palestinian territory to A, B, C, A under the Palestinian full control, B under the Palestinian civilian control, and C under the Israeli military and civilian control completely to the Israeli occupation. Unfortunately, after the second Intifada, Israel don't respect any agreement. So the settlers, they can go whenever they want, wherever they want, and they are taking more and more land, and the Palestinians are stuck in their land. Why the settlement is there? It's not for security reasons, so sure. It's to occupy, steal the Palestinian land. They use the fertile land, especially in Jordan Valley, in everywhere in West Bank. And Amnesty International, they had an amazing campaign called "Ban the Settlement Goods," which means that we should encourage people to encourage governments not to buy the settlements goods or to have any kind of investment. The UN Human Rights Council published around 112 companies and entities that invest in Israeli settlements. So how we can make the occupation, let me say, cost more? It's by making the settlements, making the occupation costly for the Israelis. And how we can make the occupation expensive for the occupier? We can target the Israeli settlements.
Perfect. That was really interesting. We're going to come back to questions afterwards. A few questions are coming through. So thank you very much for your contribution. The next speaker, you're actually talking about children. You mentioned that, so I think it's good if our next speaker is Sosan from DCI Palestine. So over to you.
Hi, I'm conscious that we don't have very much time, so I'll try and keep my comments brief. But my name is Sosan. I'm the UK Advocacy Officer at Defence for Children International Palestine. We're a local Palestinian organisation, and our work is divided into child protection and accountability programmes, of which I'm part of the latter. So our accountability programme involves fairly extensive documentation of the Israeli military detention system, settler and soldier violence, threats to the right to a childhood. So this involves documenting how the occupation and its components like checkpoints, demolitions, settlement expansion and violence, and the closure of Gaza impacts things like education, housing and health for children, or any underlying determinants of those things. We also document incidents of child recruitment by both Israeli and Palestinian actors and ill treatment in the Palestinian juvenile justice system. So given that we only have less than 10 minutes today, I thought I'd talk to you about military detention specifically. So you may already know that Israel has the dubious distinction of being the only country in the world that automatically and systematically prosecutes Palestinian children in military courts that lack fundamental fair trial rights and guarantees. Israel prosecutes about 500 to 700 Palestinian children only in these military courts. We estimate that since 2000, Israeli military authorities have detained, interrogated, prosecuted and imprisoned around 13,000 Palestinian children. And as Issa mentioned, since 1967, Israel has operated two separate legal systems within the same territory. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli settlers are subject to the civilian and criminal legal system, whereas Palestinians are subject to military law, which means that Israeli children, even those residing in illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, never come in contact with the Israeli military detention system. Palestinian children in the Israeli military detention system are overwhelmingly subjected to violence and ill treatment that is widespread and systematic. Between 2014 and 2019, we collected affidavits, which are kind of sworn testimonies from 752 child detainees, Palestinian child detainees. Over half of them were arrested at night during what are usually very terrifying night raids. Almost all of them were not informed of the reason for their arrest. Almost all had their hands and feet bound and were blindfolded. About 3/4 were physically abused. About 2/3 were subjected to verbal abuse, intimidation, or humiliation of some form. About 3/4 were strip searched. Children in the Israeli military detention system are also not allowed a lawyer present during an interrogation, and almost every child was also denied a parent present. Over half of children who spoke to us were shown or forced to sign a confession or another document in Hebrew, which is a language that most Palestinian children don't understand. And since 2016, at least 108 Palestinian children have been held in solitary confinement. The longest was for 32 days. our evidence overwhelmingly indicates that solitary confinement is practiced solely to obtain a confession under interrogation or for intelligence gathering purposes. We found no evidence of a legally justifiable use of solitary confinement used against Palestinian children. We released a report in December documenting every single one of these cases, which you can read on our website. So in terms of your lobbying, it's really important that you begin by highlighting the inadmissibility of Israel's military courts for trying civilians. No civilian should be tried in a military court, as it denies them recognition as a civilian. We need to ensure that MPs and the government recognises and keeps repeating in all of its engagement with the government of Israel that in no circumstances should children be detained or prosecuted in the jurisdiction of military courts. However, as a minimum safeguard, while Palestinian children continue to be arrested and prosecuted within the Israeli military detention system, Israeli authorities must respect and ensure basic due process rights and an absolute prohibition against torture and ill treatment. From the moment of arrest, operations and procedures must be carried out in accordance with international juvenile justice standards, specifically the ones set out in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Israel itself ratified in 1991. It will also be important in your meetings that you emphasize that the government of Israel has really dragged its heels on this issue, and that this demonstrates why we need to continue applying pressure and why the issue is still urgent and relevant. Despite various degrees of engagement by UN bodies, including the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the Committee Against Torture, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict, numerous NGOs like us, and governments, including the UK government, Israeli authorities have persistently failed to implement practical changes to end its unlawful practices towards Palestinian children. Before your meetings, if you'd like to find out more about military detention and our campaign to end the military detention of children, which is called No Way to Treat a Child, or No Way for short, you can visit our website, dci-palestine.org. We deliver No Way in the US, Canada, and in Europe and in the UK, where we just launched recently, which was really exciting. We work with elected representatives, relevant government departments, and intergovernmental organizations to highlight and end Israel's military detention of Palestinian children. So alongside all of the valuable advocacy that you're about to undertake in the lobby day, you can also subscribe to receive emails and action alerts specific to the UK so that you can support us while we work with the UK government to press Israel to change these practices. I'll wrap up now, but of course we'll answer any questions that you have at the end, or you can email me, and I'm sure the organisers can share my email address.
Thank you. That was really informative, really straight to the point. I'm sure the viewers will find that very useful. I'm going to go straight to Wafa now from Gaza. I'm hoping your internet's going to be okay. Oh, I've just lost you. Okay, so our next speaker hopefully will get back onto the internet and come back to us. So Malek, you're up next, and you'll be talking to us about the arms trade.
Yeah.
Cool,
Okay.
over to you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Malak, and I work for Campaign Against the Arms Trade. And before I worked in the charity sector, I was a student, and I was a student activist, and I was very heavily involved in activism relating to Palestine. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to confronting Israel and supporting Palestinians on campus, and that's both kind of Palestinians in diaspora and also Palestinians on the ground in Palestine. So I'm obviously here to discuss the links between the British and the Israeli arms industries, but I first wanted to provide some what I think is vital context for the UK's relationship to the ongoing occupation of Palestine, because we need to understand where Britain lies historically in this occupation in order to understand Britain's current relationship with Israel. And so I'll keep this obviously very brief, but it's important to remember that Palestine was a British colony, and that it was the British who decided to relocate World War II refugees to Palestine without asking the Palestinians who are indigenous to the region whether they were okay with that. And ultimately, the British did what it always does, which is divide and conquer, and essentially set up Palestine for failure through the Balfour Declaration. And as much as this country asserts that Israel is an independent democratic state that is responsible for its own affairs, the construction of the Israeli state is British by its very creation, and all human rights violations as a result of that stem from British colonial rule. And the hands of the British government are not clean, and they never have been clean in relation to Palestine. So Israel has been in illegal occupation of the Palestinian West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem since 1967. Over this time, they have entrenched an apartheid regime of institutionalized discrimination and oppression, and this includes a system of checkpoints, walls, and surveillance that controls Palestinians' daily lives, demolition of houses, schools, and entire communities, expansion of illegal settlements, and imprisonment, abuse, and torture of large numbers of Palestinians, including children. Obviously, we've just heard testaments in relation to some of those things. And obviously, within Israel itself, Palestinian citizens face systemic and institutionalized discrimination. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the British state arms Israel. And Israel is the 5th largest consumer of British arms, representing around £253 million of British military exports since July 2017. So we're only talking about the last 3 years or so. Recent UK arms exports to Israel have included a variety of components, including equipment and technology, especially for aircraft and radar systems. As well as the military equipment being supplied directly from the UK, there are also components that go into US-built equipment destined for Israel. And this is important because America is the largest supplier of arms to Israel. So even though in the grand scheme of things, it might not look like we're supplying loads of arms to Israel, we provide a lot of supplies to America, and they are the primary suppliers to Israel. So this is the link between the UK and America is also really important. And in a ministerial statement in 2009, David Miliband, who was the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary at the time, admitted that Israeli equipment used in Gaza in the 2008-2009 conflict almost certainly contained UK-supplied components. But in a statement made by the government in December 2012, they admitted that no assessment was conducted in relation to the Israeli attacks on Gaza, and no assessment appears to have been carried out for subsequent conflicts either. So we know that we are arming Israel, and we are aware that our weapons are being used in human rights violations and violations of international law, but the government has repeatedly failed to do any assessment or any inquiry into how our weapons are being used to oppress Palestinians. So I want to talk about a particular type of fighter jet because this represents a large part of the UK's link to Israel. So BAE Systems, which is the UK's largest arms company, is a major partner with the United States F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, which supplies a wide variety of key components of warfare to Israel. And according to Lockheed Martin, the UK arms industry provides at least 15% of every F-35 produced. UK arms exports to the US that relate to the F-35 program are covered by what's called an open general export license. And that allows companies registered with this license to make unlimited deliveries related to this particular form of aircraft without further need for licensing until further notice. And so the quantities exported under this license are therefore unknowable. But based on estimates, and looking at kind of the deals that we've done with the US and Israel before, the 15% of the UK share represents around £315 million of money. I'm going to talk a little bit more about export licenses as well, as I've just mentioned them. So export licenses tells us the value of the goods the holder of a license is allowed to export. It doesn't tell us the actual amount. It's just the kind of maximum legal amount that they're allowed to do. And the value of the licenses the UK holds to supply Israel with arms currently lies at £479 million. In addition to this, we currently have 46 of the unlimited open value licenses that I just mentioned. And most of these licenses are for defense technology and attack aircraft, helicopters, and drones. We've tried to do freedom of information requests in relation to export licenses with Israel, but they've all been denied since 2016. So I don't have a lot of detail on them, but that's kind of what we know. So in addition to British arms companies supplying Israel, Israel is also the largest arms exporter in the world, and so they have a very thriving defense and military industry of their own. And Britain is a large consumer of Israeli arms as well. So Israel's military sector is made up of over 200 public and private companies, but it's dominated by just a few companies. And the first one is Elbit Systems, which is by far the largest arms company in Israel. And then there's 3 other state-owned companies that really kind of dominate the industry. That's Israel Aircraft Industries, Israel Military Industries, and Rafael. The UK spends millions of pounds each year on what is called battle-tested arms from Israeli companies. But what battle-tested means is that these weapons have been tested on Palestinians under occupation. There is a particularly strong link with drone warfare, where Elbit Systems and a company called Thales UK, so Thales is another kind of much smaller arms company, were awarded $500 million contract by the British government to create drone warfare. And all of Israel's major arms companies are regular exhibitors at the Defense and Security Equipment International Arms Fair. So it's a bit of a mouthful. We shortened that to DICE. And DICE is a really, really internationally renowned military arms fair. And it's a large focus of the work that we do at Campaign Against the Arms Trade. And in the last few years, Israel has sent so many of its defense companies to the DICE arms fair that they're able to set up what is called a pavilion. And a pavilion is basically groups of same companies from the same country, sorry, and they are a key feature of this arms fair. So we know that Israel and the UK have a very lucrative relationship when it comes to the selling and the buying of weapons. And so to summarize what I've said, because I know there was kind of a lot of detail in there, is the illegal occupation of Palestine and the human rights violations that occur to maintain this occupation is a British creation and the responsibility of the British state to rectify the harm being committed. Israel is one of the largest consumers of British arms, and Britain has done very little to ensure that our weapons are not involved in the violations of international law that Israel has been accused of. Israel is the largest arms exporter in the world, and Britain spends millions of pounds on arms deals with Israel, weapons which we know to have been used in countries such as Afghanistan and Syria. And for this reason, we at Campaign Against the Arms Trade encourage you to call for a two-way embargo. So not just kind of a boycott, or not just a refusal to sell arms to Israel, but also a refusal to buy arms from Israel as well, and to end all military collaboration between the UK and Israel.
Malak, thank you very much. Thanks again for your intro there. We have a slight problem. We've been trying to get our fourth panelist on board, but she's having internet problems, unfortunately. She sent her apologies. She is trying, so if we do get her on board, she can jump into the Q&A session. So guys, again, thank you very much. We have some questions, but before we get on to those, Issa, you mentioned something about settlement goods. And obviously in the UK, we import a lot of produce from Israel that's marked as Israel or settlements. What would your ask for the students going into the MPs be? What would you ask them the government should be doing regarding settlement goods? So you're muted. To unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. I want the students to study more about the Israeli settlements. I am ready to stay in touch with them and send them a lot of reports, a lot of information about the Israeli settlements, and they can make a fact sheet about settler violence, about the Israeli government activities in the occupied territories and the Israeli impunity, the two sets of laws. So they can do a lot, and DCI can give them a lot of information about the children and how the Palestinian children are treated or mistreated And me personally, the worst arrest experience in my life was to be arrested with Palestinian children. So we can make them really weaponed by facts about that. About settlement goods, Europe and UK accepted to label the settlement goods. If you go to any UK supermarket, you don't see the labeling. This is the basic, let me say, demand they can ask the parliament members to do about labeling the settlement goods. This is one. Two, which is something very important. How come UK accept to buy goods from a stolen land or illegal land according to the international law? I talked to MPs from UK, even from the Labour Party and from the Conservative Party. They all agreed when they visited Hebron that settlement goods must be banned from UK, but they didn't want UK to be the first. So we want the students to tell their MPs, that UK must be the first country to correct its historical mistake by banning the settlement goods. And not only the goods, even the settlers, the violent settlers who attack Palestinian houses, who are very violent. They are completely, terrorists according to the international description of terror. So we want them to ask parliament members to ban settlement goods and to ban the violent settlers from coming to Europe or coming to UK. This is something very important that the students should ask their MPs. And they can even contact Amnesty International. They did a great study about settlement goods. They can reach to the UN and see how many companies in UK is investing in the Israeli settlement, and ask the MPs to make those companies accountable for their investment in the Israeli settlement. I give you a small example. Very close to my house in Tel Rumeda, the settlers stole a Palestinian land. They plant grapes there, and they have Hebron Heights wine, and their main shop is in London. They sell it in London. They steal Palestinian land. They plant vans there, and they get the grapes, and they make kosher wine. And the wine they sell it in London. So we want the people in London to stop that business from running in London, and make the company in London accountable for accepting to import products from a land which is stolen back from the Palestinian. And even UK consider all the settlements illegal. The foreign ministry in UK, they consider all the settlements in the occupied Arab territories as illegal, but they don't do anything to make it costly or expensive, or they don't do any concrete. And this is what we can ask the MPs to. What the concrete action they do to make the settlements more expensive, or to make Israel stop its settlements and freeze or dismantle the settlements, or make the settler leaders accountable. The Israeli government has 6 ministers. You can say that 1/3 of the Israeli government are settlers. They live in settlements.
Excellent. And is what you were saying before, for the students that are going to the lobby, that they should be really pressuring the UK government to actually go with their position on settlements. They say it's illegal, yet we're importing. It makes no sense. It makes no logical sense. On that note, if I could go to Malek, we have import and export with Israel, but when the UK government exports out to a country, are there any guidelines that normally use with other countries to say, okay, yeah, it's okay to sell arms to this country, or it's not okay? And is that being applied to Israel?
So I'm not particularly sure about the legalities, but I'm pretty certain that the UK, even if there's nothing stipulated in international law, which there should be, the UK, I'm pretty sure, does have its own guidelines on not arming conflict, or not arming kind of authoritarian regimes. And I think this is where they kind of and ah and managed to get Israel to drop through the cracks. It's this kind of technicality of Israel is technically a democracy. Well, it's an apartheid regime, so how can it be a democracy when so many of its kind of people living in its population are living under occupation? And so kind of not really rebranding Israel, but making, Israel has a very kind of lucrative PR campaign, essentially, that countries like America and the UK buy into. And we really need to kind of disrupt that narrative that Israel is, overwhelmingly a peaceful state and a democratic state. And that then makes it easier for us to draw the links between where the UK is essentially violating its own policy and its own complicity in human rights violations. But we know that Israel in many ways is held to a different standard to other countries. And we also know that the United Kingdom is happy to kind of fund conflict if it benefits from it. So we see this in the war in Yemen, for example. We know that the UK is one of the major, actually Saudi Arabia, I said that Israel is our kind of fifth largest consumer. Saudi Arabia is our first largest consumer of our arms. And most of those are being used on Yemen. So the UK is able to duck and dive really when it comes to this, and it's also able to make problems essentially go away. So I know when BAE Systems was done for kind of major corruption and fraud, Tony Blair essentially paid for the case to go away. And also conveniently made all the kind of evidence that the UK or the British government was collaborating with BAE Systems on this disappear as well. So that wasn't really an answer on what we can do, but
Okay,
yeah, I think dealing with Israel's PR campaign as kind of a state of the kind of democracy and peace is probably our first step.
Yeah, I mean, similar, I suppose, with regard to settlements. What we want is, again, the parliamentarians to uphold international law, to ensure that these standards are applied evenly, and Israel is breaking these. Therefore, export licenses should stop, and we should stop harming Israel.
Yeah.
Solsan, we'll talk about military detention. Could you expand? You're saying that no other country has military courts for children. So is that what makes Israel stick out in terms of this aspect?
No, it is the systematic and automatic nature of it. So military courts exist in many countries in the world. Children are prosecuted in many of those military courts. But it's the fact that in Israel, if it is a Palestinian child in the occupied Palestinian territory, not including East Jerusalem, they are automatically entered into a military court. And there are kind of rules around that. And I think it's also just a sort of staggering quantity of children. We're talking up to 700 children a year. So it's the distinction is the fact that there is an automatic process.
Excellent. I'm just going to wrap up by asking you guys to spend 1 minute on the key issue of why it's important to speak to parliamentarians, why you think it's important that students actually speak to MPs and join the lobby, and leave with one key issue you would like to, just to reiterate the key issue you would like them to raise with the MP. If I start with Malak.
I think it's absolutely crucial that you speak to your parliamentarians and your MPs. As much as we have a horrendous government currently in power, we do have lots of good MPs that have been elected, and Palestine is increasingly becoming an agenda point for more kind of left-leaning MPs. And it's good that we kind of exploit that momentum and we start making our case for Palestine. I would also add to that is to lobby your institutions and get in contact with me. Sorry, shameless plug. But get in contact with me if you want help doing that, because your institutions will also have kind of lots of kind of indirect ways of arming Israel as well. But yeah, it's really important that you are confronting kind of people in power and you are holding them accountable, because at the end of the day, they are supposed to be public servants. We pay their income, and they should be held accountable to us. So you should make sure you get your voice heard. The issue that I would want you to bring up with them is a two-way embargo. So it's not just one way. It's not just us refusing to sell arms to them or us refusing to buy their arms. It needs to be two-way, otherwise it won't really work. So two-way embargo, and also actual inquiries into where our weapons have been sold. and what they have been used in, because that's part of the issue with making a legal case, is there's so much secrecy around how Israel is using the weapons that we give them, and it's very hard to, a lot of what we have is speculative or kind of evidence is kind of here and there. So we want robust inquiries into what exactly we've sold Israel and how they've used those weapons, and that allows us to make a clear case for where human rights violations have occurred.
Excellent. Sosan?
Yeah, I think that the one main thing that will be really important for you to convey is that children should never be tried in the jurisdiction of and prosecuted under the jurisdiction of a military court in no circumstances. So if there's nothing else you convey, please convey that. And I think that's something that I'll kind of add, because I'm sure that Issa and Shimil will also have more to say in terms of kind of broader issues, is just remember that, you know, whoever you're meeting with, your MP is accountable to you, and it can feel incredibly nerve-wracking going into a meeting with someone perhaps who is older than you if you're a young person, but you'll find very quickly once you've done it once that it's actually, you know, pretty easy, straightforward, and that you should hopefully take away a lot of confidence from the experience. And I hope that you go into it with the confidence knowing that you are the one that holds all the power here, because if they perhaps make you a promise during that meeting, you then have a sort of point of leverage that you can use to hold them accountable. You have something to follow up with them on. Yeah, if there's anything that you can take away as well from me, is just to sort of go into it feeling fearless, fake it till you make it. And I'm sure that after your first meeting, you'll be a pro at having meetings with MPs. And I know that Friends of Al-Aqsa are also doing kind of regular training that will hopefully kind of skill you up and build your capacity and your confidence a bit. And I really hope you attend those as well. And good luck.
Thank you. Issa?
Yes, I want to talk to the students and tell them I am very proud of them, that they are doing an amazing work for Palestine. Me, as Issa, I started my activism when I was in the university. I want them to really believe in themselves, and they can make the change, because they are the majority now in the world, and they can influence their leaders. I want them to go to the meetings with the fact sheets, with knowledge, with experience, and with enough materials to give out to their MPs. I want them to ask their MPs to come and visit Palestine, especially Hebron, to understand the real apartheid and real, discrimination and segregation, and to be very strong in front of the MPs with very strong self-confidence. That makes a huge difference. To believe in themselves, to support each other, and to be really equipped with their fact sheets and knowledge, and have real questions to the MPs about their attitude and their nice speech in the media, and doing nothing in real life.
Excellent, Issa. If I could I just ask you about what's happening to you tomorrow? Please share with us, if it's okay.
Yes, I'm facing trials in Palestinian court and in the Israeli military court. Last January, in January 6th, I was convicted with 6 military charges after being indicted with 16 military charges since 2016, and my next hearing will be the punishment, the sentence, the final sentence will be on February 8th. So I may face jail time because of my non-violence activities with Youth Against Settlements. We were doing media, direct actions, tours, advocacy, and legal work for the Palestinians. And tomorrow I am going to the Palestinian court for criticizing the Palestinian leadership, for defending Palestinian journalists who were arrested by the Palestinian Authority, for criticizing the public leadership. And I am accused of 3 main charges. One, it's all about freedom of speech. One about causing strife, criticizing the figures, which means the leadership. And the third one, it's a violation of the Palestinian infamous cyber crime law, which I campaigned with everybody in Palestine against that cybercrime law, which affects our privacy and freedom of speech. I see that there's no change without paying a price, and I'm ready to pay the price to make a good change for my people and for my community and for myself too.
Thank you. And you can see, he says literally on the front line here, and he's asking you to just advocate for the Palestinian cause here. For us, it's relatively easy. Sometimes we just get lazy, or we think that we're powerless, or we think that it's okay, someone else will do it. But really, none of these arguments are good enough. All we need to do here is literally jump on the website, foa.org.uk, and just contact your MP. The email is there, just ask them. If they don't reply, email them again. A lot of the times, maybe they're busy, or maybe they're trying to ignore you. Whichever way it is, you need to get a reply. So continue. So I know a lot of people have contacted the MPs, but the MP hasn't replied yet. Please do email them, call them as well. Call them on the switchboard, ask for your MP. As Sosan said, they're accountable to you. The MPs work for you. Something that in my parliamentary work, MPs always say that we need more and more people coming to talk to us, reminding us of the issues. And it's literally in our hands. It's about whether we want to or not. Sometimes we say that, you know what, we're too busy at work. We're too busy juggling our exams and our studies and our home life, etc. But really, you know, some of these things take 30 seconds, literally, to go onto the website and send the emails takes 30 seconds. And the actual meeting itself doesn't take more than 15, 20 minutes. So are we really that kind of activists where we're not really willing to spend 15, 20 minutes to ask and hold our MPs to account? Because if we're not doing it, who's going to do it? If you listening to this aren't going to do it, then I'm guaranteeing it's going to be harder for someone else to do it. So the power really is your hand. I don't believe in you are the future, etc. I believe you are now in the present. You are the leaders. You have the ability to make a difference. The question is whether you want to. And Isa is literally on the front line here, asking people to get involved. And we've had excellent briefings from our three panelists. Unfortunately, Wafa wasn't able to join us due to technical problems. She was going to brief us on Gaza. But I'm sure the feedback so far from the students has been fantastic. You know, they're really getting in behind this and trying to push for those MPs to meet them and hold the MPs to account. Because as we've said already, the law's already there. International law exists, but unfortunately our government isn't implementing them, and we need to really keep applying the pressure to apply the change and make the change. Change doesn't just happen. It needs to be made. It needs to be made and forced to take place. So on behalf of Friends of Al-Aqsa and our partner organization ASAP, I would like to thank you all for attending the briefing and our students for attending, and I hope you continue to push regardless of if they meet you on the 3rd or not. Keep asking for the meeting. It doesn't have to be on the 3rd. The power is in your hands. We have the ability to make a change. Let's make that change. So again, guys, thank you very much for joining us, our viewers and our panelists, and I hope we can do this again. Thank you very much.